Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're putting on our medical detective hats and launching an investigation into two of the most critical culprits in nephrology, acute kidney injury and chronic kidney disease. You know, your kidneys are absolute masterminds of filtration, but when they fail, the physiological fallout is massive. Our goal today is to equip you with the precise clinical, laboratory, and radiological evidence you need to tell these two syndromes apart. Opening our case file, here's exactly what's on the agenda for today. 1. Defining kidney failure. 2. The sudden strike, AKI. 3. The slow burn, CKD. 4. Clinical progression and stages. And 5. Differentiating AKI and CKD. Let's dive in. Section 1. Defining kidney failure, the scene of the crime. We begin right here, establishing the baseline of what actually happens when these vital organs stop doing their job. So the crucial point to understand is that whether it happens in a matter of hours or over a span of decades, the fundamental physiological failure looks exactly the same. Kidney failure is simply the loss of renal excretory function because of a reduced glomerular filtration rate, or GFR. Because the filtration system is broken, toxins that are supposed to end up in the urine stay right there in the blood. This leads to the retention of nitrogenous wastes like urea and creatinine, creating a highly toxic state known as uremia or azodia. And that brings us to our central clinical dilemma. If a patient presents in your clinic or the ER with elevated creatinine and signs of uremia, well, how do you know what you're actually dealing with? Is this a temporary crisis that we can reverse, or is it the endpoint of a permanent, irreversible decline? To solve this, we've got to interrogate our first suspect. Section 2. The sudden strike, AKI. Let's meet the culprit behind sudden renal emergencies. Acute kidney injury, which we previously called acute renal failure, is a straight-up medical emergency. It's defined by an abrupt deterioration of kidney function. We're talking over a period of hours, days, or at most a few weeks. You'll see an acute increase in serum creatinine, and it's frequently, though not always, accompanied by oliguria, which is a severe drop in urine output. But here is the absolute most important takeaway for AKI. If you catch it early and manage it properly, it's usually reversible. The kidney tissue is injured, sure, but often it hasn't been permanently destroyed. Now, what's really fascinating about the etiology of AKI is how it perfectly maps out into 3 clear geographical zones relative to the kidney. First up, we have prerenal causes. This is a perfusion problem before the kidney even gets involved, like severe dehydration, hemorrhage, or heart failure causing low blood flow. Second, we have intrinsic causes. This is damage happening directly inside the kidney tissue itself. Think acute tubular necrosis from toxins or ischemia or glomerulonephritis. And finally, postrenal causes. That's an obstruction after the kidney, like a kidney stone, prostate enlargement, or a tumor blocking the flow of urine. Figuring out exactly where the strike occurred is your very first step to reversing it. Section 3. The slow burn, CKD. Now let's shift our focus from that acute strike to a much more silent, progressive, and deeply destructive condition. Unlike AKI, CKD plays the long game. By definition, chronic kidney disease is a long-standing process lasting more than 3 months. It is usually progressive and, sadly, associated with an irreversible worsening of renal function. Over months and years, functioning nephrons are progressively destroyed and replaced by useless scar tissue. The body tries its best to adapt, but eventually, the GFR just steadily declines. Section 4. Clinical progression and stages. Let's see how these two diseases actually build over time, comparing the short-term evolution of AKI to the long-term staging of CKD. So AKI takes the patient on an absolute physiological roller coaster. It typically initiates with the oliguric phase. Because the kidneys aren't filtering, patients develop fluid overload, edema, and really dangerous spikes in potassium, known as hyperkalemia. This phase can last roughly 10 to 14 days. Next up is the maintenance phase, where urine output stays low and uremic toxins just continue to rise. But then, as the kidneys finally begin to heal, we hit the diuretic or recovery phase. The patient suddenly starts producing massive amounts of urine. We're talking sometimes up to 3 liters a day. They lose fluid and electrolytes incredibly rapidly because the kidney tubules haven't quite regained their concentrating ability yet, before things finally stabilize back to normal function. In stark contrast to that roller coaster, chronic kidney disease is a slow, one-way staircase descending straight toward dialysis. In stages 1 and 2, the patient is usually completely asymptomatic, even though mild GFR loss and early damage are already happening. By stage 3, moderate to severe GFR loss sets in, and we actually start seeing early clinical signs, like anemia. When a patient hits stage 4, severe electrolyte and metabolic problems become very obvious. And finally, stage 5 is end-stage kidney failure. That's where the GFR drops below 15, and the patient absolutely requires renal replacement therapy, like dialysis or kidney transplant, just to survive. The Katie-Geigo classification heat map perfectly illustrates this risk progression. It uses 2 really vital metrics, the downward drop of GFR and the increasing presence of albumin in the urine. This framework shows us that kidney disease progression isn't just about how much filtration is lost. It's also about how much protein is actively leaking through those damaged filters. A dropping GFR combined with rising albuminuria pushes a patient straight out of the green safety zone, accelerating them directly into the high-risk red danger zone. Section 5. Differentiating AKI and CKD. We have our suspects and we know their modus operandi. Now it's time for the grand comparison to definitively tell them apart in a real clinical setting. When you're trying to differentiate them, you really want to look for the smoking guns of chronicity. If a patient comes in with high creatinine, but they also have a known history of kidney issues for over 3 months, it's very likely CKD. But beyond the history, you've got to look at the systemic effects. Does the patient have unexplained anemia? Do they have severe hypertension? Are they showing signs of nerve damage like neuropathy or bone disease like osteodystrophy? If those complications are present, the kidneys have been failing for a long time. In pure AKI, those chronic systemic complications are generally totally absent. When we look at the radiological evidence, ultrasound is just an incredible diagnostic tool here. The physical size of the kidney tells a very distinct story. In acute kidney injury, the kidneys are typically normal-sized, or occasionally they're even enlarged due to sudden swelling and inflammation. But in chronic kidney disease, years of scarring and nephron death lead to small, contracted, shriveled kidneys with significant cortical thinning. Now, there are a few exceptions. For instance, diabetic nephropathy or polycystic kidney disease can actually cause CKD with enlarged kidneys, but generally speaking, small kidneys mean chronic failure. To close out our investigation, we've got to look at the lab work. This is exactly where you confirm the timeline. In CKD, the failing kidneys actually stop producing a hormone called erythropoietin, which is what signals the bone marrow to make red blood cells, leading to normocytic anemia. Furthermore, chronic failure throws mineral metabolism into complete chaos. Patients retain phosphate and lose calcium, which triggers secondary hyperparathyroidism as the body desperately tries to pull calcium out of the bones. Lastly, if you look at the urine sediment under a microscope and you see waxy or broadcasts, that indicates severely dilated, chronically damaged tubules. These lab findings are the literal fingerprints of long-term kidney destruction. We've laid out all the evidence, but I want to leave you with a really fascinating and frankly critical realization. These two conditions are deeply, deeply intertwined. Survivors of a severe AKI episode are at an extremely high risk of developing CKD later in life. Conversely, patients with existing CKD are incredibly vulnerable to new acute injuries. It's a highly dangerous loop. So, if acute injury leads to chronic disease and chronic disease invites acute injury, how do we break the cycle? Ultimately, it all comes down to aggressive early detection, protecting the kidneys from nephrotoxins, and managing those underlying risk factors way before the damage is done. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the right questions.